In the early 18th century, abandoning a man on a deserted island was considered a death sentence. No rescue, no supplies, no hope. When sailors left him behind, they were certain of one thing: he would not survive. Yet 5 years later, a man they believed long dead stepped back into civilization, alive, changed, and carrying a survival story so extreme it would inspire one of the most famous tales ever written. This is the true story of the man they left to die. To understand how this happened, we need to travel back over 300 years, to an age when the ocean was lawless, maps were incomplete, and survival depended on obedience and discipline. This was the golden age of sail. Ships crossed the world for months at a time, carrying men into waters few had ever seen, and many would never return from. The man at the center of this story was not a captain, not a nobleman, he was a sailor, one of hundreds of ordinary men who lived brutal lives at sea, paid little, fed poorly, and punished harshly. His name was Alexander Selkirk. Selkirk was born in Scotland, a restless and rebellious man from the start. Like many young men of his time, the sea promised escape, adventure, fortune, and purpose. But it also demanded obedience, and Selkirk struggled with authority. Life aboard a ship was relentless. Food spoiled quickly, fresh water ran low, disease spread faster than rumors, discipline was enforced with violence, and disagreements were not debated, they were punished. During a voyage across the Pacific, Selkirk became convinced the ship he sailed on was no longer seaworthy. He believed its hull was compromised, that continuing the journey would mean certain death. He argued with his captain, loudly, publicly, and in the rigid hierarchy of a ship that was unforgivable. When the ship anchored near a remote island for repairs, Selkirk made a fatal mistake. In a moment of defiance, he demanded to be put ashore, believing the captain would eventually take him back. But the captain didn't argue. He agreed, and then the ship sailed away. Alexander Selkirk was left behind on a deserted island in the Pacific Ocean. No crew, no shelter, no certainty that another ship would ever pass nearby again. What he had was all he would ever have. The supplies were minimal: a musket with limited ammunition, a knife, a cooking pot, a Bible, and the clothes on his back. No compass, no tools to build a boat. The island was uninhabited and unforgiving. As night fell, the truth became unavoidable. This wasn't temporary. No one was coming back. He had been left to die. The first weeks would nearly break him. Hunger, fear, isolation. But survival wasn't the hardest part. Staying sane was. And what Alexander Selkirk was forced to become would shock the world when he finally returned. The first days were chaos. Selkirk paced the shoreline, scanning the horizon from dawn until dusk. Every wave looked like a sail. Every shadow felt like movement. He expected the ship to return. It never did. Hunger arrived quickly. The island offered little that was obvious or familiar. Selkirk tried fishing. He failed. He searched for fruit. Most of it was inedible. Each day without food weakened him, physically and mentally. Then something changed. Selkirk discovered wild goats roaming the interior of the island. With limited ammunition, he took a risk, and it worked. For the first time since being abandoned, he ate, but ammunition would not last forever. Selkirk knew that if he relied on his musket, he would starve once the shots were gone. So he adapted. He learned to run barefoot across jagged terrain, to chase goats until they collapsed from exhaustion, to use their hides as clothing. Survival was no longer about tools, it was about endurance. With food secured, Selkirk turned to shelter. He built huts from wood and leaves, one near the shore to watch for ships, and another deeper inland for safety. Fire became his constant companion. Without it, the nights were unbearable. But the island was not empty. At night, rats emerged by the hundreds. They bit his feet as he slept, chewed his clothes, threatened his food. Selkirk learned to sleep elevated, surrounded by fire. Weeks turned into months, Months turned into years, and the silence became unbearable. Selkirk talked to himself, sang to himself, read the Bible aloud just to hear a human voice. Isolation does something to the mind. It bends it, and if left unchecked, it breaks it. Time stopped making sense. Days blurred together. The calendar of civilization disappeared. Selkirk measured life by storms, by hunger, by survival. Then one day, a ship appeared. Selkirk ran to the shore, waving, shouting, lighting fires. But the ship never came closer. Worse still, it belonged to enemies, pirates. Discovery would mean death. Selkirk extinguished his fires, hid in the forest, watched from the shadows as armed men walked the beaches he once called home. Rescue had come, and he couldn't take it. That night, Selkirk broke. He had survived hunger, beasts, isolation, but hope had betrayed him. If this was his fate, then he would face it alone. Yet something changed. Selkirk stopped waiting. He stopped hoping. And in doing so, he became something else entirely. A man shaped by the island, and when the next ship arrived, they would barely recognize him. Years passed, and Alexander Selkirk was no longer merely surviving. He had adapted completely. His body hardened, his senses sharpened. He could outrun goats barefoot across jagged stone. He could live for weeks without seeing the shoreline. The island had changed him, but it had also refined him. Selkirk knew every path, every hiding place, every sound. What once terrified him had become familiar. The island was no longer a prison, it was his world. Then one morning, a sail appeared. Selkirk did not panic. He did not chase the shoreline in desperation. He lit his fire, and he waited. This time the ship came closer. The crew spotted the smoke. A boat was lowered, and as they approached the shore, they saw him. He was barely recognizable, dressed in animal skins, hair long and wild, skin burned dark by the sun, but he spoke clearly, calmly, like a man who had learned patience the hard way. Alexander Selkirk had survived 4 years and 4 months alone on a deserted island, against all odds. When he returned to civilization, crowds gathered to hear his story. A man who had been left to die had returned stronger than anyone imagined. Selkirk's story spread quickly. It fascinated the public, inspired writers, and years later, a novelist named Daniel Defoe would draw inspiration from it. The result? Robinson Crusoe. Yet there was a cruel irony. After surviving alone for years, Selkirk struggled to readjust. The noise, the crowds, the rules, civilization felt foreign. Eventually he returned to the sea, and years later he died aboard a ship, not on land, but where he had always belonged. Alexander Selkirk was left to die. Instead, he learned how to live, alone, forgotten, and unbreakable. His story reminds us that survival isn't just about strength, it's about adaptation, patience, and the will to endure, even when the world sails away.